I was halfway through breakfast when a stranger knocked on my door. He smiled politely and told me I had until the end of the day to leave. I laughed. He didn't. He opened a folder. My address was on the first page. Then he looked at me and quietly asked, "No one told you the house was sold?" I told him to say that again. He did, word for word. Same calm voice, same polite expression, like he'd already had this conversation before and knew exactly how it ended. "I've lived here for 31 years, I said. "My name is on the deed. I paid this house off in 2014. I don't owe a penny to anyone." He nodded, not like he doubted me, like he already knew. That was the first moment something inside me shifted. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't threatening. He stood on my porch the way someone waits at a hotel desk for the clerk to hand over the room key, patient, almost apologetic, completely certain the room already belongs to him. "Who sold you this house?" He hesitated. "I'm not comfortable telling you that, yet." Yet. That word settled between us like another person standing on the porch. I looked back at the folder. He hadn't closed it. The top page carried the county seal, a recording number, a filing date. 11 days ago. I asked him how much he'd paid. When he told me, I stared at him. It wasn't even close. Less than half of what the house was worth. Nobody sells a paid-off house that cheaply unless they aren't trying to get the best price. They're trying to make sure the sale happens quickly, quietly. I asked where he'd found the listing. He looked at me. "There wasn't one." "What do you mean?" "It was a private sale." He paused. "The seller came to me." I felt my stomach tighten. Not fear, not yet. Just the quiet realization that whatever this was, it hadn't happened by accident. "Please leave," I said. He didn't argue. Instead, he reached into the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He held it toward me carefully, almost respectfully, the way someone hands over news they wish they didn't have to deliver. I took it. I didn't understand most of the legal language. I didn't need to. I recognized the address. I recognized the date. I recognized the notary stamp. Then my eyes drifted to the signature. At first, I didn't recognize the name. It was a married name. A name I'd only seen on Christmas cards over the last few years. Then I looked at the handwriting, the rounded letters, the long tails on the Y's, the way every capital leaned just slightly to the left. I knew that handwriting better than my own. I was the one who taught her how to write. I didn't say anything. The man waited. He could see something had changed. A minute ago I thought he was confused. Now I wasn't sure. Kto iz nas ошибался? I handed the paper back. He took it carefully, almost apologetically. "I'm sorry," he said. "I really thought you knew." Knew what? That the sale had already gone through. The words barely registered. I asked when he'd first spoken to the seller. "About 3 weeks ago." He told me she contacted him directly. No real estate agent, no public listing, just a private offer. She said she was helping her elderly father move into assisted living and wanted a quick sale. "I'm not in assisted living," I said. He looked at me for a long second. "I can see that." That answer scared me more than if he'd argued. I asked if he'd ever spoken to the owner. He nodded. Just once, a phone call. I felt my stomach tighten. He confirmed everything, the price, the closing date. He thanked me for being patient. I stared at him. "That wasn't me." "I know." He said it quietly. Too quietly. I asked what the man sounded like. Older, calm, polite. He hesitated. "But not much like you." Neither of us spoke. Then he reached into the folder again. I should probably tell you something else. I braced myself. I've already been inside the house. For a second I thought I'd misheard him. What? The seller gave me a key. He looked embarrassed. I walked through last Thursday. I couldn't breathe. He said every room was furnished, pictures on the walls, clothes in the closets, coffee cups in the sink. He assumed I'd already moved somewhere else and simply hadn't cleared the place yet. The seller said a cleaning company was coming this weekend. A cleaning company. To pack up 31 years of my life. I looked past him into my hallway. Linda's coat was still hanging beside the door. My boots were still under the bench. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. Except someone else had already been inside. Someone else had already decided none of it belonged to me anymore. I looked back at him. Whoever sold you this house, I paused, knew exactly how I lived. I asked him who signed the papers. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the folder in his hands, then back at me. My daughter, he said quietly. She handled everything. You're wrong. I barely recognized my own voice. She wouldn't do this. He didn't argue. He simply shook his head. I thought the same thing, until I met her. He told me she knew the house. Not the way someone knows a property from a listing. She knew it the way someone knows the place they grew up. Before he ever drove down, she walked him through every room on a video call. She told him which windows stuck after heavy rain, which faucet ran hot first. She pointed to the water stain on the ceiling in the back bedroom. It happened in 2011, she told him. She was right. I hadn't looked at that stain in years. She remembered it. She knew where the breaker panel was. She knew the garage door motor burned out in 2019. She even warned him about the cracked step on the back porch. Every detail was right. He said she had old photographs on her phone. Christmas mornings, birthday dinners, a woman laughing in the kitchen while blowing out candles. I assumed it was your wife, he said. It was. He looked down. She called it Dad's place, every single time. Never the property, never the house, just Dad's place. I couldn't stay on my feet anymore. I sat down on the porch step. I hadn't sat there since Linda's funeral. He sat a few feet away, resting the folder across his knees. I've bought property before, he said. I always check everything. The title search came back clean. The county records matched. Nothing looked suspicious. He wasn't defending himself. He sounded like a man trying to understand how he'd been fooled. We sat there without speaking. Then he frowned. There was one thing. I looked at him. One thing that didn't make sense. He rubbed the back of his neck. Right before we signed, your daughter asked me something. What? He met my eyes. She asked if the old man still checked the mailbox himself every morning. I felt the blood drain from my face. How did she know that? I checked the mailbox every morning at 7:15. Every morning. Same slippers, same walk down the driveway, same 10 steps back to the porch. I'd done it for so many years I could have found that mailbox with my eyes closed. My daughter knew that, because one afternoon, months ago, she'd asked me, Dad, do you still get the mail yourself every morning? I laughed. Who else is going to do it? She laughed too. You're so predictable. At the time, it sounded harmless. Sitting on that porch now, it didn't. I started replaying every conversation we'd had over the last year. Not the big ones, the little ones. The questions I never thought twice about. One Sunday, she asked if I still kept every important paper in the same place. I told her I did. She smiled. Saves you from losing things. Another time, she asked if the county still mailed my property tax notices instead of emailing them. I remember teasing her. "You think I'm going to start paying bills on a computer at my age?" She laughed. "I guess not." There was another conversation. She asked if anyone besides me ever came by the house during the week. Friends, neighbors, family. I told her no. Most weeks, nobody did. She simply nodded, like she'd expected that answer. At the time, I thought she was making conversation. Now, every question felt like it belonged to something larger. Not concern, preparation. The buyer hadn't said another word. He was watching me put the pieces together, slowly, painfully. "I think," he said quietly, "someone knew your routine better than you realized." I looked across the yard. Everything was exactly where it had always been. The bird feeder, the old oak tree, the mailbox. For the first time in 31 years, it didn't feel like home. Then another memory surfaced. Small, almost forgettable. Late one evening, my daughter had called just before bed. We talked for only a few minutes. Right before hanging up, she asked one last question. "Dad, if something ever happened to you, who would notice first?" I laughed. "The mailman, probably." There was a long silence. Then she quietly said, "Good." The line went dead. Back then, I thought she was joking. Standing on my own porch, I wasn't sure she'd been joking at all. I pulled out my phone and called her. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I called again. This time it didn't ring at all. Straight to her recording. The same cheerful voice I'd heard 100 times. The voice of a woman who couldn't possibly have done what I was starting to believe she'd done. I sent a text. "Call me. Now." I watched the screen. Delivered. Then, read. She'd seen it. Nothing. The buyer stayed where he was, giving me the kind of space people give strangers when they realize they're witnessing something deeply personal. I typed again. "I know about the house. Call me." Delivered. Read. Still nothing. I kept staring at the screen, waiting for the little typing bubble to appear. It never did. Then my phone vibrated. One message. Just one. "Dad, please don't make this harder than it needs to be." I read it again. Something about it felt wrong. Not the words, the way she wrote them. She'd called me Daddy for as long as I could remember. Reading Dad felt strangely distant, like I was reading a message written to someone else. I called again. Voicemail. Another vibration, another message. "Please be out by Friday." 5 words, no explanation, no apology, nothing. I lowered the phone. I must have been holding it lower than I realized. The buyer's eyes drifted toward the screen. The moment he realized what he'd read, he looked away. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "That doesn't sound like someone asking." I finished the thought for him. "It sounds like someone giving orders." He nodded. Neither of us spoke. The morning felt unnaturally quiet. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. Something in his expression changed. He stepped a few paces down the driveway before answering. I couldn't hear much. Just one sentence. "Yes? He's still here." He ended the call, but didn't turn around immediately. When he finally looked back at me, his face had gone pale. "What is it?" I asked. He walked back slowly. "That," he hesitated, "was the attorney who handled your sale." My stomach tightened. "I never hired an attorney." He held my gaze. "I know." He told me the attorney's name. I'd never heard it before. He told me the firm's name. That meant nothing to me either. But somehow, that attorney knew my full name. He knew my address. He knew the sale had gone through, and he seemed to know I was still inside the house. The buyer said the call wasn't unusual. The attorney simply wanted to confirm the timeline, like everything was moving exactly as planned. I asked how they'd first gotten in touch. "The purchase agreement," he said. "It had his contact information." "And who sent you that agreement?" He looked down at the folder. "Your daughter." Neither of us spoke. I wasn't trying to understand my daughter anymore. I was trying to understand everyone around her. "Did you ever meet this attorney?" He shook his head. "Everything happened by phone or email. No office. No closing table. No face-to-face meeting. Just documents. Just signatures. Just instructions." "Show me the first email he ever sent." He unlocked his phone and started scrolling. It took longer than either of us expected. When he finally found it, he stopped. His eyes stayed on the screen. "What is it?" I asked. Without saying a word, he handed me the phone. The email wasn't from 11 days ago. It wasn't from 3 weeks ago. It had been sent 5 months earlier. 5 months. Long before anyone supposedly decided to sell the house. Long before the paperwork. Long before the closing. The subject line caught my attention. It didn't say purchase agreement. It didn't say property sale. It said estate transition plan. I read it twice. Estate. Not property. Not residence. Estate. I looked up. The sale hadn't even started yet. The buyer slowly shook his head. No. Then I noticed the timestamp. The email had arrived the morning after my annual physical, the appointment my daughter insisted on driving me to. I remembered sitting in the examination room, telling the doctor I was healthy, independent, still living alone, still taking care of myself. She'd been sitting in the waiting room. I folded the phone shut and handed it back. Neither of us said anything, because for the first time that morning, it no longer felt like someone was stealing my house. It felt like someone had been preparing for me to disappear. I went back inside and opened the filing cabinet. The buyer stayed on the porch. He didn't try to follow me. I think he understood there are moments a man has to face alone. That cabinet held everything: the deed, insurance papers, tax records, bank statements. The folder Linda had labeled House with a black marker almost 20 years ago. I pulled it out. It felt lighter than it should have. The deed wasn't there. Neither was the original title insurance. The property tax records that went all the way back to 1993, gone. Someone hadn't tossed the cabinet. They'd gone through it slowly, folder by folder, taking only what mattered, leaving enough behind that I would never notice unless I looked for something specific. I stood there, staring at the empty folder. Then I remembered March, my daughter's visit, the weekend she insisted on helping organize my office. I remembered hearing drawers opening, papers being moved. I never once got up to see what she was doing. Why would I? She was my daughter. I went upstairs. The fireproof box was still on the top shelf of my closet. Social Security card, birth certificate, passport. Everything looked untouched. Until I reached for my will. It wasn't there. Instead, there was a document I'd never seen before. 1 page, typed, official. Across the top were the words, "Voluntary transfer of residential property." My name was printed underneath. At the bottom, my signature. At least, it was supposed to be. I stared at it for several seconds. It looked right. Almost. Then I saw it. The small D in my last name. Whoever copied my signature got every letter right except that one. I'd been signing my name for more than 50 years. I'd never written it that way. Not once. I carried the paper back outside. The buyer studied it carefully. "This wasn't in my closing packet," he said. "Then why is it in my house?" He had no answer. I turned the page over. A small yellow sticky note was still attached. Just 2 words. He agreed. I frowned. The handwriting wasn't my daughter's. It wasn't mine either. But I knew I'd seen it before. I just couldn't remember where. The buyer looked at the note, then quietly reached back into his folder. "I think," he said, "there's something else you need to see." He pulled out a photograph. Not a legal document. Not a form. A photograph. Color. Printed on ordinary paper. The edges were slightly bent from sitting inside the folder. It showed my front porch, my house, my front door, the welcome mat, the ceramic flower pot where I used to hide the spare key. The picture had been taken from across the street, low angle, like someone sitting inside a parked car. I turned it over. A date was written on the back, 7 months earlier. 7 months. That was before the attorney's first email, before my daughter asked about the mailbox, before the doctor's appointment, before any of this. Someone had been watching my house long before I knew there was a plan. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "It came with the closing documents," he said. "They called it a property condition photo." I stared at him. "There was never an inspection." He nodded. "I know." I looked closer. In the reflection of the front window, I could barely make out someone sitting in the living room. Me. I was home when that picture was taken. Someone photographed my house, without ever knocking on the door. I handed the picture back. My hands were steady. Everything else wasn't. "There's more," he said. He unfolded another document, a typed letter, addressed to him, signed by the attorney. It explained that the homeowner was elderly, lived alone, and had begun showing signs of cognitive decline. It asked the buyer to remain patient because the homeowner might become confused or refuse to leave. Confused. I built a deck last summer. I still changed my own oil. I filed my own taxes every April. Someone hadn't just forged paperwork. They had written an entirely different version of my life. If I called the police, I'd sound exactly like the letter predicted. If I denied everything, I'd sound unstable. If I fought back, I'd become proof they were right. They hadn't just stolen my house, they had built a cage around my credibility. I looked at the buyer. "Do you believe any of this?" He slowly shook his head. "Not anymore." He stood there for a long moment. Then he reached into the very back of the folder. "I almost left this with the attorney," he said quietly. "It didn't make any sense to me." He handed it to me. It wasn't another legal document. It was an old manila envelope. My name was written across the front, not in my daughter's handwriting, not in the attorney's, Linda's. I hadn't seen that handwriting in 6 years. Then I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The envelope had never been opened, and across the top, in thick black ink, someone had stamped a single word: evidence. I opened it slowly. The paper was old, yellowed. Blue ink, faded the way ink fades when it's been sitting in the dark for years. Linda's handwriting, every letter, dated 8 months before she died. "Richard, I need to tell you something, and I need you to sit down, even though I know you won't." I was standing. She wrote that she'd found something on our daughter's laptop during a visit. A payment notification. She looked. She said she wished she hadn't. The debts were large, old, the kind that don't shrink, the kind that make people quiet at family dinners and short-tempered on the phone and desperate in ways that don't show until it's too late. At some point, Our daughter had used the house, our address, documents she copied during a visit. Linda wasn't sure when it started. She wasn't sure it mattered anymore. She confronted her, alone. Never told me. I didn't want you to look at her the way I was afraid you would. Our daughter cried, promised it was over. Linda didn't believe her. So I started sending money, every month, from the savings account you never check. I thought if I kept her above water, she'd never need to come for the house. 7 months, until the hospital bills started, until there was nothing left. The last paragraph was only a few lines. If you're reading this, it means she didn't stop. And I'm not there anymore to stand between you. I'm sorry, Richard. I thought I could love both of you hard enough to hold it together. I think I was wrong. But I'd do it again. That's the part I can't forgive myself for. She signed it the way she signed everything. All my love, always. Linda. I folded the letter back along its original creases. The buyer was still standing there. What did she say? I couldn't answer him. I slipped the envelope into my shirt pocket, over my heart. The mailman came up the street. Same truck, same route, same wave he'd given me for years. I raised my hand without thinking. He smiled and kept driving. For a long moment I just stood there. Then I looked at the house. The porch railing I'd rebuilt last summer. The kitchen window where Linda used to wave when I mowed the lawn. The oak tree our daughter climbed when she was 7 because she wanted to see the neighborhood from the top of the world. I remembered catching her when she jumped down, every single time. Linda knew none of this would save the house. She knew the money wouldn't be enough. She knew the promises wouldn't last. She knew it wouldn't work. She did it anyway. For years, I thought the bravest thing Linda ever did was fight cancer. Standing there on that porch, I realized I'd been wrong. The bravest thing she ever did was spend the last months of her life trying to save the 2 people she loved from each other. She couldn't save the house. She couldn't save our daughter. She couldn't even tell me the truth, because the moment I knew, I would have chosen sides. She never did. And that was the burden she carried alone. I watched the mail truck disappear around the corner. Some losses happen all at once. Others arrive so quietly, you don't realize they've been taking pieces of your life for years. That morning, I didn't lose my house. I finally understood what Linda had already lost long before she died.